Good afternoon and welcome to Trails and Rails. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Andy Trembley, and first off, I want to thank all of you for your support of Trails and Rails. I see a lot of faces that were with us for Wagons West, and Wagons West this last weekend was just such an overwhelming success, and that's because of the support that we received from the community, so thank you so much. Our attendance was just shy of 1,200 people for the day. It was an amazing day. Thank you so much for helping us celebrate 50 years of Trails and Rails. And we're going to continue that celebration today because we're going to have a fantastic speaker this afternoon. Dr. Amber Alexander, she is an assistant professor of history education at UNK. She earned her doctorate in educational studies with a focus in innovative learning technologies from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, along with her MSED in instructional technology and an MA in history from UNK. I think this lady knows what she's talking about. She's done a lot of research. Her academic specialties include history education, online learning, U.S. World War II home front, which is what she's going to speak to us today about, Nebraska history, narrative inquiry methodology, and for the past 15 years, Dr. Alexander has researched Nebraska's World War II Army airfields, beginning with her master's thesis and continuing through ongoing projects exploring construction, civilian response, and long-term regional impacts. This afternoon, we're honored to get a wonderful story about the airfield here in Kearney as it pertains to recreation and games. We think a lot about World War II as this very serious time in our history, which it was, but we also have to think about the ways that we built community and found ways to get through a difficult period. And so I'm so looking forward to Dr. Alexander's talk. Dr. Hanson.
Thank you so much, Andy. Does the sound okay? Everybody good? Okay. Like Andy said, I'm going to be talking today about Kearney Army Airfield, but Nebraska Army Airfields too, a little bit broader, and focusing really on sports because of our theme this summer here at the museum. So how many of you attended the baseball game on Sunday? Yeah, a lot of familiar faces. Yeah, that was a great time. I had a blast watching. So I'm going to jump right in. So on a beautiful evening in May of 1943, a large crowd gathered at Harmon Park in the heart of Kearney to watch an opening softball game of the 1943 season. And so much like our game we had the other night, we have this softball game. And the event kicked off again with the Kearney Mayor, Joe Ty, and Lieutenant Colonel Vernon Trevelyan, who was the first commanding officer of the Kearney Army Airfield, throwing and catching the first pitch. And the two teams, I forgot I have a photo here of Ty and Trevelyan. Thank you, Dr. Ty, for sharing that with me. So the two teams battling on the diamond that night were the local Grantham Cafe softballers and the Kearney Army Air Base officers team. And despite a slow start, the game heated up in the second inning with the Air Base officers rallying, scoring 5 runs. And one of these runs was a result of a home run by Lieutenant Vic Spadassini, base athletic officer and player manager for the Army Air Base officers softball team. And this was the first of several home runs he would hit during this 1943 season. He was a power hitter. And while the Grantham Cafe team added 5 runs to the scoreboard, they couldn't catch up, and the officers defeated Grantham 8-5. So while we can all appreciate a thrilling softball or baseball game, this particular game demonstrates the importance of sports during World War II and the collaboration between the Army Air Corps and the community of Kearney in aiding the war effort. So to explore this further, I think I want to step back and look at military installations across Nebraska during World War II, and in particular, the 11 Army airfields located across the state, which served as training facilities for the United States Army Air Corps. Each of these bases were constructed on or near towns across the state, as you can see here, and these really brought diverse individuals to the area for the construction, development, operation of the bases, and then training of the troops. And the influx of diverse people created challenges for local communities, yet it provided an opportunity for civilians to actively support the war effort from right here in Nebraska. And today we'll explore the integral role of sports and recreation activities at Nebraska Army Airfields during World War II. So sports provided a way for soldiers to engage in something familiar amid the changes of lifestyle created by joining the military. So as soldiers left home, often many for the first time as they were quite young, to be stationed across the nation and the world, every part of their lives became regimented. And military officials recognized these challenges and supported participation in organized sports, which, quote, helps keep young men both physically fit and morally clean. So during World War II, athletic programs were supported by both the Army and Navy for physical stimulation and increased morale. Military leaders such as General Dwight D. Eisenhower and General Douglas MacArthur also recognized that leadership skills were fostered through athletics. So during the interwar period, General MacArthur emphasized the importance of sports at West Point, the United States Military Academy, by integrating athletics into the curriculum there. And he supported his decision by saying, nothing more quickly than competitive athletics brings out the qualities of leadership, quickness of decision, promptness of action, mental and muscle coordination, aggressiveness, and courage. And nothing so readily and so firmly establishes that indefinable spirit of interest and pride, which we all know as morale. And so here, even before the war, we're looking at sports and the benefits. In addition, the War Department believed that soldiers who were inactive were more susceptible to things like venereal disease, or inefficiency, or had a greater likelihood of going AWOL. And as the Army prepared for participation in World War II, they saw the need to provide their own sports and recreation. So when planning for the construction of military installation, athletics facilities were often included. So I spent a lot of time last summer in DC at the archives looking at the construction plans for different military installations across the US, and many had athletic facilities planned right in from the beginning. And if they weren't planned, they were added shortly afterwards out of need. And then once these installations were constructed, like the bases, for example, officers encouraged participation in organized sports, and then supported accommodation for organized sports whenever possible. The editors of the Duster, which was the Kearney Army Airfield newspaper, had this to say: we believe in being physically fit. The boys play football, softball, and basketball on their day off, then take an hour of calisthenics besides going swimming in town and working on the farms. Soft nod on your life. We think this is a pretty good record. So we also see the positions created on military installations, and I use that term because my research focuses on air bases, but my students have researched a little more into the ammunition depots across the state, and there's a lot of crossover when it comes to sports and recreation as far as people stationed there at these places or workers coming in from the outside to work at these places. But what's happening then is in these military installations, they create these positions like recreation supervisor or base athletics manager. A push for community involvement in sports and recreation among those near military installations was mandated clear from the top. An abundance of literature was distributed nationwide about the importance of community collaboration in the war effort. And a lot of this still exists in the archives at Library of Congress and in DC and College Park. This is a pamphlet from the Federal Security Agency, which addresses recreation explicitly. They call on civilians to take responsibility for recreation in their areas. Responsibility for the recreation of war workers and their family rests squarely on the local community and its citizens. And then they also talk about, so not only providing recreation for soldiers, but those who are stationed or who are here to work at these installations. In addition, the U.S. Conference of Mayors was held in January of 1942, and they issued a proclamation pledging all-out aid and asked mayors to pitch in to help whenever possible. And so we see this with Kearney Mayor Tide demonstrating his willingness for participation through consistent collaboration with Major Trevelyan and others at the Kearney Army Airfield throughout the war. The Army Air Corps recognized the value of involving the community and supporting their morale boosting efforts, and locals were invited to the base to visit, given tours, and encouraged to do their part in helping to make life easier and more fun for those stationed at the bases. And this included giving them ideas on how they could help. And in terms of aiding recreation efforts, community groups stepped up to the plate and offered their time, equipment, and facilities. And at times, these community contributions were actually quite tremendous. For example, during the summer of 1944, military personnel and a group of civilians raised $9,000 to construct a new swimming pool at the Fairmont Army Airfield, which was just south of York, Nebraska. And this was a modern pool, 75 feet by 150, so big pool. A similar pool was dug at the Bruning base, and materials for this pool were donated by citizens from the surrounding towns, and then labor furnished by volunteer enlisted men and officers. But this demonstrates the role that communities played in helping increase activities specifically for these enlisted men and women. So the city of Kearney actually was very generous. They set aside Wednesday evenings as Army Night at Harmon Park. And so they offered the use of all facilities, including tennis, swimming, baseball, and softball for GI use. And then base officials also worked with the city to organize a 6-team softball league. So there were 3 civilian teams and 3 Army teams that they'd play triple headers on Wednesday nights. And so that game that I was just talking about was part of this for the opening season of 1943. We also have the County Fair Board providing the use of the County Fair Park for baseball games, exclusively for base use. With grandstands seating about 5,000, the city was happy to prepare the park for these games for players from the airfield because the city didn't have its own baseball team that year due to a shortage of men to play. And so this provided not only entertainment for Kearney citizens, but allowed them to kind of interact with people from the base. To increase soldier morale, officers at Army airfields across Nebraska encouraged the creation of base team sports like softball, baseball, basketball, football, bowling, and then other individual sports like boxing, track and field, swimming, tennis. And early in the war, sports teams were typically organized on the bases and military installations, and they competed against other teams from the base. And teams were often formed with members of base divisions or squadrons. So for example, these are from Kearney here. On the left, we have Squadron C. This is the aviation squadron, and these, you'll notice, are African American men. And then over here on the right, we have Squadron A. And participation in these sports grew quickly. In the spring of '43, shortly after the construction of the Basin Alliance, 2 softball leagues, the American and National League, were started on the Alliance Army Airfield. And due to their popularity, they grew so fast that Army officials had to reach out to the city, and they worked with the USO representative, and they were able to get these airbase teams included in the city league so they could play more games, and spectators really liked this. And they did this, they continued to add teams to their list as the war continued. We also see individuals and teams from the airfield participating in these community leagues. And with the small populations in the rural areas, with so many young men away from home fighting for their country, finding competition was somewhat of a challenge. And so in seeking out qualified opponents, the airfield teams often competed against college teams. So for example, the McCook Junior College Indians were regular competition for the McCook Air Base Bombers in basketball and other sports. Doane College was a competitor for air base teams in 1944 in the southeastern part of the state, like Bruning and Harvard. Even the Hastings Ammunition Depot had teams. The Nebraska State Teachers College Antelopes frequently played basketball against the Kearney Air Base team and other sports as well. Now the competition was pretty fierce as the bases brought excellent athletes to the local area. Former college and professional athletes were occasionally stationed at Kearney and other air bases for their training. And their talents were put to use then in these base sports teams, or even as coaches or managers or trainers of these men on these bases. For example, in 1943, Private Wiley Ferguson was a former light heavyweight Golden Gloves champion boxer, and he became the assistant for the base athletic officer at the Kearney Air Base. And this is a poor picture, but here, this is Vic Spedicini, the guy, the home run hitter from the first game we were talking about. He's the base athletic officer, and here he is it roughing this boxing match. And the Kearney Air Base newspaper reported Ferguson's skill in the ring will now be at the service of soldiers on his base as they learn to throw left hooks at the Nazis and Japs. And the arrival of such great athletes often created a lot of excitement on the bases, as these young men were soon to be met with celebrities. Here's the University of Southern California tennis star Private Johnny Gino was stationed at the Kearney Army Airfield, and his arrival, this is just one article, but the newspaper's full of articles anticipating his arrival here. In addition, Lieutenant Edwin Kingsley, he was the base rail transportation officer, and once he came here, tied for second place with two others in the Nebraska Open Golf Championship Tournament at the Kearney Country Club in 1943. Now, he brought a lot of experience with him to the base. So he was a former top 10 national amateur champion in 37 to 39. So, for example, he ranked as the 6th best golfer in the U.S. in 1938 and the 10th best in 1937. And he also won 5 state championships. So you can imagine this is your competition. These people who have done tremendous things before they get here. Well, the inclusion of professional athletes on Army teams did not always sit well with community members. So newspaper articles are quick to point out when professional athletes participated in base athletics. Often this was done to justify losses. So, for example, when the Kearney Grantham Cafe team lost the opening game of the 43 season to the Air Base officers, the local news was quick to point out that many of the officers had experience as semi-professional athletes before coming to the Army. So, another incident was recounted after a basketball game between McCook and the Kearney Army Airfields when the McCook Daily Gazette printed, "The brand of ball exhibited last night on the junior college hardboard was deserving of a far greater turnout of local fans than the fairly small congregation which occupied the pews. Both teams were well primed with former college and semi-pro players who are playing the game now because they love it. This, boys and girls, is basketball of a quality that in peacetime folks hereabouts only gets to see once in a blue moon." So here they're commenting on how amazing these players are and how fun this is to watch, and they're criticizing civilians for not being there. And so this lack of attendance at this event could be that the community didn't support the bases fully as we thought, or maybe they just had other things going on. But nonetheless, this critical nature is seen throughout a little bit. So in addition, members of the Kearney community were apprehensive about the arrival of African American service members at the Kearney Army Airfield in 1943. The War Recreation Committee was a committee set up here locally in Kearney to provide recreation within the community, and they were found it daunting that not only now would they have to set up one set of recreation activities, but they needed to set up a separate second set. And so this initially resulted in the opening of a recreation center, which was later incorporated with the USO in the Keller building at 23rd and Avenue A, which was exclusively used for African American soldiers. And before the arrival of the aviation squadron, which were the African American men, servicemen and women were all welcomed at Harmon Park Pool. And when a coalition composed of the War Recreation Committee, the American Legion, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, and then other civic organizations in town here, were tasked with finding an additional pool when they heard that the aviation squadron was coming to alleviate the crowding at Harmon Park. So it was determined it was too crowded. And so the city sand pit south of the airbase was originally considered, along with a sand pit at Veterans Park, to provide additional swimming facilities in town. Now the final selection was actually the pool at the 1733 branch, which was west of town. Now when this pool is open, you know, they say it's because of general crowding that we need another pool, but then this pool is open and it's for the exclusive use of African American servicemen in Kearney. And so Squadron C actually takes control of reconditioning this pool, getting it cleaned up and ready to go. And you do this through funds from the Legion Recreation Fund. And the pool is opened in the summer of '43 with exclusive use of African American soldiers, with Sergeant Roy Carrington completely managing the pool. This is the kickoff, June 19th. You can see him diving off the high dive there. And the motor pool from the base provided free transportation to the pool. And it was originally deemed that admission would be charged the same as Harmon Park, but they had enough funds that they could make admission free. And the pool in 1733 are pretty far apart, so this was a big deal, this transportation. And it was well attended. Between 75 and 100 were in attendance at the pool each day. And in addition, monthly events were held there with swimming, and then they would have like refreshments or a dinner, and then followed by a dance. And hostesses, young African American women, were brought in from Omaha to entertain these servicemen for these events. So despite the challenges faced with the arrival of servicemen, communities often benefited from the collaboration with the airfields. And sporting events became popular entertainment in surrounding communities. I think this is fun. So this is the Thayer County, so not here, but down near the Bruning Air Base. And among the circus acts and 4-H programs and livestock parades, we have baseball by air base teams. So it becomes a spectator event for local communities. And then at times, soldiers from the bases organized sporting events with the purpose of engaging the community. So in '43, Lieutenant Edward Solomon, base athletic director at Alliance, organized a tennis tournament for civilians and soldiers to come together for that very purpose. And when few civilians signed up for the event, the local newspaper again chastises the community for lack of civilian participation in the event. GIs were invited to participate in swimming meets here at Harmon Park in Kearney. And then often these airbase teams would engage in competition, like games for philanthropy. So they would have some sort of event that they were playing for. One example, a basketball game played between the McCook Army Airfield and the McCook Junior College was a benefit for infantile paralysis and polio. And the Alliance Air Base team played the Sheridan County team for a benefit for the Red Cross. And these types of fundraising events obviously served the military, and they were able to play a sport they love, but then also engage and give back to their community hosts. And while the competition was usually excellent, the facilities for sports on the airfields were pretty subpar. Many of the airfields were quickly erected on previous cornfields or pastures. Little grass or landscaping was evident, especially early in the war. And this led to crude facilities for sports and recreation. So in June of '42, a newspaper described the Lincoln Air Base. Much of the base was still under construction, and here and there a patch of oats could be seen to remind the soldier that only a few weeks before, the place had been farmland. At times, the poor facilities impeded competition. A field day scheduled at the Lincoln Air Base was canceled due to rain and ice. Competition on these crude fields with these adverse weather was often nearly impossible. This particular air base event in Lincoln was rescheduled for a month later, with 7 squadrons participating in this 10 track and field events, with winners being awarded trophies and medals. So these were a big deal, so it was a big deal to cancel. A baseball game between the Lincoln Wings and the Fairmont Flyers was canceled due to poor conditions due to rain, and they declared that the game was too important of an affair to risk playing on a muddy field. So we can see here through quotes like this that it demonstrates the seriousness of baseball and sports. And here we have the Wings leading the 2nd Air Force League in 1944. So this is a big deal, right? A big game. So then, therefore, community facilities were used by military teams for sporting events. And this was especially true of like basketball courts, gymnasiums, and fields at colleges. So when the Lincoln Air Force Wings was set to play a big basketball game in 45 against the Patterson Field from Dayton, Ohio, they actually met at the Coliseum at the University of Nebraska. So if you've been, I mean, that would be a huge place to play, right? A huge venue. The Nebraska State Teachers College here in Kearney, the Antelopes, played the Kearney Air Force Base in basketball, and they met often at the Kearney High School gym. And often students and soldiers paid 25 cents for admission, and adults paid 50 cents. And the proceeds were usually used to purchase athletic equipment for these new base teams in Army recreation. In many instances, the proceeds collected from admission were then donated back to the teams. So for example, when Scotts Bluff hosted a softball tournament with teams from the Western Division, which would have been west of North Platte, they took the proceeds from admission and used them to help defray the costs that the winners would have to use for travel to get to Omaha to the championships. And this was a big deal with rationing, especially rationing on gas. It was difficult and expensive to get places, especially this long haul we have here across our state. So sports were instrumental in building soldier morale throughout the war, and recreation remained important even after the war. Before the end of the war, plans were made to establish sports across the nation. The Amateur Athletic Union, the AAU, requested 250,000 volunteers to establish plans for sports programs of every kind after the war. And the focus was on creating sports programs for returning servicemen to help transition these individuals back to civilian life. So even after the war, we're seeing this sports used in this particular way. So in conclusion, sports and recreation activities have played a vital role at Nebraska Army Airfields during World War II, and it contributed significantly to the physical and mental well-being of servicemen and fostered stronger ties with the local community. And these programs provided soldiers with a sense of familiarity and normalcy amid the rigors of military life, and it offered an outlet for both physical exertion and morale building. So recognizing the importance of keeping soldiers active, military officials supported these sports to maintain this high morale and combat potential issues like inefficiency and absenteeism. And through these efforts, then, we see sports becoming a critical aspect in maintaining the health and discipline of servicemen during this challenging time. And that is all I have. I do have this. This was on the wall in the exhibit before it was taken down. This is the 1733 pool, and I'm not sure what year this is. I'm thinking it's before this time period when the pool was reconditioned, but that was kind of fun. So do we have questions?
What about
Women, yeah. So I haven't dug into this very deeply, but there's nothing that I found just in my cursory research that have talked about women in sports there were women stationed here in Kearney, but as far as sports go, we don't know. Now, Squadron C, the African American men, there are lots of accounts of them playing, like Hirschfield's Clothiers was a baseball team, and so them playing right alongside these other community teams, but I have not seen anything on women, specifically. Yes?
I have something, this is kind of off base, but there's that boxing picture you had, I don't know if you can go back.
Yeah.
And this is kind of off the wall maybe. And probably not.
I'll get to it. Go ahead, Robin.
Well, right there, okay, it says Buddy Bear.
Mm-hmm.
Is that guy, and is he related to Max Bear? Because they're boxing.
Oh, I
Max
don't
Bear,
know.
the famous boxer.
That's a good question.
And I thought there was a Buddy Bear, but I could be wrong. You know,
I
his
don't
son
know that,
was in
Robert.
the Beverly Hillbillies or whatever. But I seen that name, and since they're boxing, I wonder if if there's
Yeah.
any relationship.
There was a lot of boxing was very popular across the nation during this time, and so I don't do that. Yeah.
We hosted a lot of, the soldiers from the Air Base. My dad was a World War I veteran, and we lived out on Ravenna Road. And as we'd come into town, we would pick up all those soldiers, and, quite often they would come out. My mother would cook, fried chicken dinner for them on Sunday, and they'd spend Sundays, and then we'd take them back to the base.
Yeah, there's a lot of accounts. I think fried chicken must have been like one of the favorites because there's a lot of accounts of soldiers really like later recalling that's what they remember about being here in Nebraska is the meals and the fried chicken comes up a
Yeah,
lot.
that's what we had to eat.
Yeah.
Everybody had their own, raised their own food.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Maxine.
As a side note, Wiley Ferguson, who's
Mm-hmm.
from back east someplace,
Mm-hmm.
came to the Kearney Air Base,
Mm-hmm.
married a Kearney girl, stayed in Kearney, and Roy would know, their son was one of our classmates.
Really? See, I did not know
And
that.
and he started out as a disc jockey for the Kearney Youth Center, and his name was Art Ferguson, and he made it really, really, really big.
Charlie Tuna.
Charlie Tunas, and that's his dad, Wiley
That's
was his
awesome.
dad.
Yeah, there was a lot of, this created quite a sensation for Wiley to come to Kearney.
And Wiley married Bernadine, and that was a really, really close friend of my aunt. Bernadine
Small
Wiley.
world.
I don't know, I don't remember, I would probably have it,
Well,
I don't know about
and
that.
I think that shows like the power of community during this time. I mean, so many people married locals and stayed
Yeah.
or came back.
Yeah.
And I think that, sports was one aspect, obviously, of this. There's others, hosting dinners and all sorts of things, civic
And
organization.
he was from back east someplace, and I don't know where, but he came, and he just stayed after he got out, after the war, and,
Yeah,
so, yeah.
that's awesome. Thanks for sharing. Other questions, comments? I love to talk about this stuff. Yeah.
It kind of ties in with the prisoner of war camps,
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of the Germans stayed here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And lived and married and.
Yeah, they did. Not
World
only.
War II thing.
Yeah, not only that, people who came, like war workers that came to work at the Sydney Army, or the Sioux Army Depot at Sydney, or Cornhusker at Grand Island, or Naval Ammunition Depot, a lot of them stayed after the war. Dr. Jack?
Did you find anything, because there were concrete tennis courts and a pool out at the Kearney Military Academy, which was
Oh, yeah.
empty by then, were they making use of any of those?
I did not see that, but I didn't look for that specifically. They really did play anywhere they could find, and the city did a really good job of like looking for places for them, but I don't know that specifically. Yeah.
I think you mentioned the fair board and the baseball field. At one time, there was a baseball field on the fairgrounds.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Before Memorial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I didn't find any photos, but grandstands for 5,000, and they talk about it like it was pretty spectacular. So, and they really the city wanted it used because, like in 1944, they did not have a team. So this was really exciting and a great benefit to be able to use that space. And I mostly talked about baseball, softball, but we see football, a lot of, even playing Kearney High School in football, and the NSTC, and we see basketball, but playing a lot of local teams and leagues and the combination. And it seemed to be, there was no like overall, this is how we're gonna do it. It was community members getting together, or USO, usually through the USO, getting together with base officials, and then it was specific to each installation across the state.
Does anybody know when that pool was closed? I remember the dance hall, just barely. And where was that? From the dance hall, was it west of the dance hall or east of, does anybody remember?
Marty probably know.
I thought it's the foundation for the barn,
Right?
like the foundation for the barn. Seemed too big.
Barn's up against the hill.
But I do know, like, this pool was used and then it would be like shut down for several years and then have to be reconditioned and new equipment, and they'd like rediscover it every, like, you know, so often, and so it's in and out of commission over the whole like mid-century. Yes.
Did you figure out if my grandpa Joe pitched left or right-handed?
No, here's the thing, I don't know if he pitched or if he caught. I can't figure that out. So if you can help me figure that out, that'd be
'Cause
great,
he
and
was
I
a
don't know.
baseball player. He was a football player. He didn't play baseball.
Yeah, so I don't know. He could have been the catcher. Well, thank you all for coming on this super hot day. If you wanna have other questions you wanna ask, I'll stick around, so.